January 4th. Today, dear friends, we commemorate Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, the first person born on the soil of the young United States to be raised to the altars, and as we journey through her luminous yet frequently arduous life, let us allow her story to seep slowly and deeply into our hearts, because the lessons she offers, about steadfast faith, tireless charity, resilient motherhood, and daring innovation, remain as fresh and compelling today as they were 2 centuries ago, when she walked the bustling streets of New York, sailed the windy Atlantic in search of healing climates, and finally made her home amid the rolling farmland of Emmitsburg, Maryland. Pause for a moment and picture the gritty harbor of Lower Manhattan in the closing years of the 18th century, its docks crowded with tall-masted ships creaking against the piers, its streets alive with the voices of merchants and sailors from every corner of the globe. And in the midst of that vibrant ferment, imagine a bright-eyed young woman named Elizabeth Ann Bailey, daughter of a respected physician and a cultured mother who filled the house with classical music and conversations about literature, all of which nurtured a mind that loved truth and beauty, preparing her soul for a destiny far beyond anything fashionable society might have foreseen. Let the scene shift to a quiet Episcopal church where Elizabeth, dressed in simple elegance, kneels beside her beloved William McGee Seton on their wedding day, blending 2 influential New York families and stepping together into a marriage that blossomed with affection, intellectual companionship, and the birth of 5 spirited children, yet would soon be tested by the harsh winds of financial collapse and mortal illness, reminding us that sainthood is not forged in ease but in crucibles of loss, courage, and unshakable trust in God's providence. Feel the Atlantic air grow colder as you accompany Elizabeth, William, and their eldest daughter Anna Maria on a winter voyage to Italy, a desperate attempt to restore William's failing health. Imagine the blue shimmer of the Tyrrhenian Sea outside Livorno's harbor, the crisp salt brushing Elizabeth's face, the strange comfort of foreign tongues in the streets, and then the quiet heartbreak when hope gives way to William's death in the damp quarantine lazaretto, leaving Elizabeth widowed at 29, clutching her grief while still responsible for 5 children and looming debts. Hold that grief for a breath, then notice how it becomes a doorway, through the Filicchi family, devout Italian business partners who enveloped her in warmth and Catholic rituals. Elizabeth discovered in the Eucharist a presence she had long intuited yet never met, and back in New York she could no longer rest until she received that living bread, even though conversion meant social ostracism, suspicion, and the closure of her small girls' academy, the only income she possessed, because wealthy parents feared popish influences on their daughters' minds. Let us linger here and ask ourselves, how often do we cling to comfort or reputation when truth beckons us into deeper waters? And how might Saint Elizabeth's fearless ascent inspire us to accept, with serene boldness, the consequences of following Christ wherever he leads, even when friends whisper, doors close, and an uncertain road opens ahead? Now listen to the echo of boots on frozen ground in January 1805 as Elizabeth, veiled in black yet radiant with interior light, kneels inside St. Peter's Church on Berkeley Street to profess her Catholic faith. Picture the flicker of candles reflecting in her determined eyes, the creed pronounced in measured, reverent cadence, and realize that this single act reshaped the landscape of American Catholicism, because within one generation it would blossom, through her, into a nationwide system of parish schools and charitable works. Imagine, next, the modest rented house on Packer Street in Baltimore where Elizabeth, invited by Sulpician priest Father Louis Dubeg, opened a small school for girls, establishing a curriculum that paired rigorous academics with spiritual formation, and see how quickly her charisma drew other young women who yearned to share her mission. They prayed, taught, and served the poor together, codifying a simple rule inspired by Saint Vincent de Paul and Saint Louise de Marillac, whose French Daughters of Charity had already proven that practical love can heal social wounds. Shift your gaze to the rolling foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, to Emmitsburg, where an abandoned stone farmhouse became the cradle of the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph's. Hear the creak of wooden floors as the sisters rise before dawn, reciting the divine office in chant that mingles with the distant lowing of cattle, then bustle into classrooms where they transmit not only arithmetic and grammar but also confidence, dignity, and the unspoken assurance that every child, rich or poor, bears God's image and deserves a future bright with possibility. Let the camera of your mind sweep outward across the continent, pausing in dusty frontier towns and immigrant-filled port cities where, over the decades that followed, countless schools, orphanages, and hospitals would trace their lineage to this humble Emmitsburg experiment, proving that a widow with 5 children, barely 30 years old, could transform the social fabric of a nation simply by offering her yes to God's creative plan. Breathe in the crisp mountain morning of 1810 when Bishop John Carroll, America's first bishop, officially approves Elizabeth's rule, marking the birth of a uniquely American religious congregation, and notice how the children's laughter outside, rolling like bells across the farmland, reminds us that genuine holiness radiates joy, a joy that even chronic illness could not suppress, for Elizabeth's health was fragile, her lungs weakened by tuberculosis, yet her letters overflow with wit, practical advice, and affectionate encouragement to sisters, relatives, and benefactors alike. Pause now and allow her words to reach you across centuries. We know certainly that our God calls us to a holy life. We know too that He gives us every grace, every abundant grace. And though we are so weak of ourselves, this grace is able to carry us through every obstacle and difficulty. Let these lines wash over your fatigue, your doubts, your hidden discouragements, and consider jotting them on a slip of paper to tuck into your wallet or tape beside your computer screen, so that in mundane hours you recall that grace, like sunlight, floods silently upon those who simply open the windows of the soul. Travel forward to a quiet February night in 1821. Elizabeth lies in her small room, the wick of a tallow lamp dancing against rough plastered walls. The sisters kneel nearby, praying softly. Her breathing grows shallow, yet her face is peaceful. Her last whispered words, "Be children of the church, be children of the church," fall gently into their hearts like seeds, and when dawn breaks she is gone, yet not gone. Her vision will ignite generations, and indeed, more than 5,000 Sisters of Charity across multiple branches still serve today in classrooms, hospitals, homeless shelters, and refugee camps on every inhabited continent. Now invite the viewer, yes, you, my friend on the other side of this screen, to close your eyes for 10 seconds and name silently one place in your own community that aches for the touch of mercy. Maybe a lonely neighbor, an underfunded school, a chaotic family, or perhaps your own wounded spirit. Feel the gentle nudge that Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton gives, urging you to step toward that need with whatever loaves and fishes of time, talent, or treasure you possess, trusting that God multiplies every sincere offering. Recall that Elizabeth was canonized by Pope Paul VI on September 14, 1975, during the Holy Year, and the joyful throng in St. Peter's Square included schoolchildren in tartan uniforms, aged nuns in well-worn habits, and American pilgrims waving tiny flags, all cheering as the tapestry of their homegrown saint unfurled against the facade of the basilica. Remember too that the Church declared her patroness of Catholic schools, widows, in-law problems. Yes, she had her share, and people mocked for their piety, reminding us that sanctity embraces both lofty ideals and very ordinary struggles. Let us draw connections between her time and ours. She lived amid epidemics of yellow fever and tuberculosis. We navigate new plagues of anxiety, addiction, and isolation. She faced anti-Catholic prejudice. We witness rising polarization and suspicion of people whose beliefs differ from our own. She balanced motherhood with apostolic zeal. We balance work deadlines, digital overload, and family obligations that leave us stretched thin. In each arena Saint Elizabeth whispers, anchor everything in prayer, then march forward with practical love, and God will do the heavy lifting. Picture, for instance, the bustling corridors of a modern urban hospital run by the Daughters of Charity, stethoscopes and laptops replacing the linen bandages and handwritten logs of Elizabeth's era, yet the underlying spirit remains the same. Every patient is Christ in disguise, every fevered brow an altar, every administrative spreadsheet an act of stewardship for souls in pain. In that light, consider how your own profession, whether coding softwares or managing a store or editing videos for social media, can be transfigured into sacramental service when offered with integrity and compassion. For our viewers drawn to birthdays and zodiac musings, observe that Saint Elizabeth's feast on January 4th appears early in the calendar year, offering a counterpoint to popular resolutions rooted merely in self-improvement. She suggests a more radical aim: become a conduit of divine charity, and in so doing you will discover your truest self, beyond any star sign or personality metric, because your identity is etched not in constellations but in the sacred heart that loved you into existence. Let us stroll briefly through three signature virtues that shimmer in her story like stained glass windows catching morning sun. First, courageous faith, expressed when she embraced Catholic truth despite social and financial cost. Second, maternal tenderness, evident in her gentle yet firm guidance of children and sisters alike. Third, inventive charity, which refused to lament scarce resources but instead organized them creatively, birthing schools funded by sliding scale tuition and orphanages maintained by tireless fundraising letters. A reminder that holiness is entrepreneurial. Pause and invite the audience to breathe in, count to 4, breathe out, count to 6, and during that exhale silently ask Saint Elizabeth for one of those virtues that you particularly need this week. Perhaps courageous faith to speak truth kindly at work, or maternal tenderness toward a teenager's eye-rolling cynicism, or inventive charity to design a parish outreach that actually excites volunteers. We now turn briefly to the miracles approved for her canonization. One involved the cure of a little boy, Carl Colleen, from leukemia in the 1960s after his family and the Sisters of Charity prayed at her tomb. Another, the healing of Sister Gertrude Korsendorfer from a rare form of encephalitis, and yet another, the reversal of infant Anne Teresa O'Neill's alleged terminal illness. These wonders echo Elizabeth's earthly ministry of caring for sick children and overworked mothers, signaling that the communion of saints is anything but abstract. Heaven still touches hospital rooms, still hushes frantic parents, still confounds doctors when all science says nothing more can be done. Imagine, then, letting that reality reshape your evening routine. Perhaps before scrolling headlines or doom-surfing social media, you light a small candle, whisper a decade of the Rosary, and entrust your family's aches to Saint Elizabeth, believing that grace, like water, seeks the lowest crevices and fills them to overflowing. As we approach the final arc of this narrative, return in memory to Emmitsburg's leafy campus today, where the stone basilica built over her remains welcomes pilgrims year-round. Hear tour guides explaining how the oak pews are original, how the side altar's marble came from the quarries Elizabeth once described in her letters, and then step outside to the cemetery where tiny headstones mark children of early settlers who died of scarlet fever, each cross a silent testimony to the sisters' presence in times when civil institutions offered no safety net. Let that cemetery provoke gratitude for the many Catholic hospitals and schools that now serve millions precisely because one widow listened to the whisper of her heart and answered yes. Before we conclude, allow a practical challenge to surface. Sometime in the next 48 hours, write one concrete act of charity on a sticky note. Perhaps donating to a local crisis pregnancy center, tutoring a neighbor's child in math, inviting a grieving co-worker for coffee, and place that note where you will see it until you complete the task, because Saint Elizabeth teaches that ideas mature into sanctity only when translated into deeds. Finally, imagine yourself standing in a quiet church on a chilly January night, perhaps after weekday mass, the sanctuary lamp glowing ruby red, and as you kneel you whisper, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, teach me to trust as you trusted, to serve as you served, to found, within the ordinary circumstances of my life, an outpost of God's kingdom where every hungry mind is fed with truth and every wounded heart discovers hope. Then rise, bless yourself slowly, and step back into the cold air with new warmth in your soul, ready to scatter seeds of charity that, like hers, will outlive you and transform the generations who follow. And so, on this 4th day of January, may the luminous witness of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton guide our resolutions, shape our ministries, heal our families, and draw us ever more deeply into the inexhaustible love of the God who carried her through trial to triumph, and who longs to do the same for each of us.